Imagine walking into your living room, right? You're looking at your meticulously maintained, pristine home aquarium, and you find the surface of the water coated in what looks like shattered iridescent glass.
Just completely covered.
Right. And you haven't added any harsh chemicals, you haven't, radically changed the water chemistry or introduced any strange new species.
Everything seems normal.
Exactly. Yet your miniature ecosystem is suddenly suffocating under this thick, greasy slick. And the ultimate culprit behind this whole invasion, a difference of just a millimeter in the physical size of a single fish food pellet.
I mean, it sounds almost absurd when you frame it that way.
It really does.
But it is a perfect illustration of how microscopic variables can trigger macroscopic failures. We tend to think of ecological disasters happening on this massive global scale like deforestation or oil spills in the ocean.
Right, the big stuff.
Yeah, the big stuff. But the fundamental laws of cause and effect apply just as ruthlessly to 10 gallons of water sitting on a desk.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today for you, the listener. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a highly specific, honestly fascinating journal entry titled Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 252.
Catchy title.
I know, right? It was written by an aquarist named Ang, published today, actually May 9th, 2026. And Ang's log, it reads like a locked room mystery.
It really does.
You've got this enclosed glass box struggling with the sudden, unexplainable appearance of surface scum of biofilm. And our mission today is to trace the forensic detective work required to track down this seemingly impossible cause.
And, the stakes here might seem confined to just a hobbyist's living room, but the underlying mechanisms at play are universal. We are examining the architecture of a closed system.
Yeah.
The narrative in this journal entry forces us to look past the obvious symptoms of a problem and really interrogate the hidden compounding factors.
Unseen stuff.
Exactly. The physics of the water, the biology of the tank's inhabitants, and, this is key, the mechanical friction of the tools we use to maintain it.
Okay, so to even begin diagnosing this, we have to visualize what this invader actually looks like, right?
Yeah.
Ang provides a highly specific description in the notes.
Very specific.
Yeah. When observing the surface of the aquarium, the scum doesn't just look like murky water. Ang describes it as and I'm quoting here, thin sheet of fractured ice or crinkled oily paper.
That's such a vivid image.
It completely changes how I picture the problem. My mind instantly goes to a rainy parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
You know when a car has been leaking motor oil and you get that iridescent greasy puddle sitting on the wet asphalt?
With the rainbows in it?
Yes.
Yes.
It has a structural quality to it. It looks solid, almost as if you could just pinch it and peel it up off the ground. But wait, is this just an optical illusion, or is the crinkled paper look actually telling us something about the physical structure of the water itself?
Oh, it's definitely telling us something. That structural quality is the vital clue here. The biofilm is not an optical illusion, and it isn't simply cloudy water mixing around. It is a tangible, physical sheet suspended at the absolute boundary between the water and the air.
Wow.
And Ang's notes pinpoint the exact environmental condition required for this sheet to exist. The surface of the water is, quoting the journal directly again, way too still.
Too still.
That stillness is the foundational prerequisite.
Wait, water doesn't just spontaneously generate a sheet of fractured ice simply because it stops moving, right? There has to be some physical mechanism turning still water into a canvas for this scum.
There is. The mechanism is surface tension, operating in the total absence of agitation.
Okay.
So let's look at the physics of a body of water for a second. Water molecules are highly cohesive. They love to stick together through hydrogen bonds.
Right, they attract each other.
Exactly. Down inside the main body of the water, what we call the water column, every molecule is surrounded by other water molecules, pulling on each other equally in all directions.
Makes sense.
But at the very top, where the water meets the air, those molecules have nothing above them to bond with. Because of this, they cling even more tightly to the molecules next to them and below them.
Oh, so they form a microscopic skin.
Precisely. That skin is surface tension. Now, in a natural river, or in an aquarium with heavy filtration pumps and bubbling air stones, that surface skin is constantly being broken and mixed by turbulence.
So it never gets a chance to settle.
Right. When the surface is agitated, any floating organic oils or proteins get churned back down into the deeper water where beneficial bacteria can digest them. But Ang's tank lost that agitation. the water became perfectly still.
So that tight skin of water molecules just became this unbroken, rigid floor from the perspective of the air above it.
And a ceiling from the perspective of the water below.
A ceiling, wow.
Yeah, so any substance in the tank that is less dense than water-like organic oils or lipids will naturally rise. And without surface agitation to break the tension and mix things up, those rising oils just hit the surface and get trapped there.
They have nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go. They spread out across that unmoving molecular skin, linking together until they formed the visible, crinkly biofilm Eng described. The stillness didn't create the oil, but it provided the undisturbed canvas necessary for it to accumulate into a visible sheet.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That explains the structural canvas. But an empty canvas doesn't paint itself, you know?
No, it doesn't.
If still water is just the environment, what are the actual paints gathering at the top to create this oily film? We have to figure out where the raw material is coming from, because a healthy tank shouldn't be generating a parking lot oil slick.
And this is where Eng's observational skills really shine. The journal isolates two distinct biological sources dumping organic material into the water, and crucially, they are happening simultaneously.
Okay, what are they?
The first is a dietary change. Eng recently switched the fish back to a regular brand of high-protein pellets.
Got it.
The second source is a highly localized pocket of decaying aquatic plants, specifically sitting in the bottom left corner of the aquarium.
Hold on, wait, I need to stop you there, because that second culprit feels totally counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, I thought the entire point of putting live plants in an aquarium was to act as a natural biological filter. They absorb carbon dioxide, they release oxygen, they consume nitrates. How are the very things meant to purify the ecosystem suddenly acting as the primary pollutants?
It's a really common misconception, actually, that natural elements only provide positive outputs.
Huh.
We have to remember that a plant is a living organism, and when parts of it die, it becomes a biological liability.
A liability?
Yeah. What we're looking at here is the process of cellular lysis and decay,
Cellular lysis.
the breaking open of cells.
Oh, okay.
When aquatic plant leaves die, maybe they aren't getting enough light in that specific bottom left corner, or they're just shedding old growth. Their cellular walls break down. A living plant is basically a factory storing sugars, starches, proteins, and cellular oils inside its tissues.
When it dies.
When those leaves rot, all of those internal organic compounds are dumped directly into the surrounding water.
But wouldn't the tank's bacteria just eat that dead plant matter? I mean, isn't that how composting works?
In a perfectly balanced system, yes. But Eng notes this decay is highly localized in the bottom left corner. This is a crucial detail.
Why does the corner matter?
Well, if you have a single dead leaf floating around a massive tank, the bacteria distributed throughout the entire aquarium can easily process that minor amount of waste. But when you have a concentrated pile of decaying matter trapped in one specific corner, it creates a localized spike in biological load.
Oh, it's too much at once.
Exactly. The bacteria colony in that immediate cubic inch of water gets completely overwhelmed. They cannot multiply fast enough to consume the sudden dump of organic sugars and oils.
So because the local bacteria are overwhelmed, the raw, unprocessed cellular oils just escape the bottom corner and float straight up to the surface.
Yes. That plant decay provides a steady stream of biological lipids rising to the top. And remember, that is only half of the equation.
Right, the food.
We had to compound that with the high-protein fish food Eng reintroduced. Protein is incredibly important for aquatic growth, but it comes with a chemical cost. High-protein foods inherently contain higher lipid content, which means more fats and oils.
So does the oil just leach out of the pellet while it's floating there waiting to be eaten?
It can,
Yeah.
right? Or the fish consume the high-protein pellet, metabolize the nutrients they need, and then excrete the excess organic waste.
Ah.
Either way, you are significantly increasing the total volume of lipid molecules circulating in the water column. So look at the ecosystem now.
It's a mess.
You have the baseline oil levels elevated by the high-protein diet. You add the sudden concentrated stream of cellular oils venting from the dying plants in the corner.
And it all goes up.
All of this material is lighter than water, so it rises. And because the surface water is perfectly still, it hits that surface tension skin and pools together into that fractured, oily slick.
That is wild. The tank is literally suffocating itself from the inside out using its own biological building block. Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The food meant to nourish the fish and the plants meant to oxygenate the water are essentially teaming up to pollute it.
It's a dark irony.
But this brings us to the most relatable and honestly the most frustrating part of Eng's journal entry. Even with the high-protein food and the dying plants, an aquarium shouldn't crash this dramatically unless the biological load has been pushed way past its tipping point.
Right.
So how did so much of this oil-producing protein get into the tank in the first place?
We finally arrive at the human element. The journal contains a rather blunt confession. Aang has been overfeeding the fish.
Uh-oh.
A lot of excess food has been entering the system. But the reason behind this overfeeding is just a fascinating study in mechanics and daily routine.
It really is. Aang points out that the new high-protein pellets are a slightly different physical size than the old food. Just a tiny difference.
It's a millimeter.
Right. And because of this tiny dimensional change, the pellets tend to tumble out of their plastic container way too easily. When I read this, I immediately pictured like sitting in a pizzeria.
Okay.
You grab the glass shaker of red pepper flakes to put a little heat on your slice. You're used to the shaker having those tiny pinprick holes, so you confidently give it a vigorous shake over your plate.
I know where this is going.
But someone at the restaurant swapped the lid for one with massive holes, and suddenly you've dumped a towering mountain of red pepper flakes onto your pizza, completely ruining the slice.
That is the exact mechanism of error happening here.
Isn't it?
It is muscle memory colliding with an altered physical interface. We often look at ecological failures and seek out a moment of profound negligence. We want to say, oh, the operator was careless.
Right. We want someone to blame.
But Aang wasn't just recklessly dumping cups of food into the water. Aang was performing a daily, repetitive task, using established muscle memory.
So what does this all mean for our aquarist? It's actually a mechanical failure of the packaging, not just reckless feeding. The aquarist didn't fail. The packaging failed the aquarist.
Exactly. It is a classic user interface friction problem applied to the physical world. A manufacturer alters the physical dimensions of a pellet by perhaps 1 millimeter, or, Aang simply buys a different brand.
Yeah.
That tiny change in diameter alters the coefficient of friction inside the plastic container. The pellets just flow differently. When Aang tilts the container with the exact same angle and force used every single day prior, twice as much food cascades out.
It's a domino effect, and it's entirely triggered by a millimeter difference in a piece of fish food.
The cascade is incredibly linear when you trace it backward. A tiny physical change in the product bypasses the user's muscle memory. This UI friction results in an accidental overfeeding event.
Which means more protein.
The overfeeding introduces a massive surplus of protein into the water. The biological breakdown of that protein generates excess lipid oils. The concentrated plant decay in the corner compounds those oils. They all rise to the top of the tank.
And hit the still water.
And because the water lacks surface agitation, they sit on the surface tension and form a visible, crinkled film.
Every single variable is interlocked. A change in the friction of a plastic bottle directly results in a sheet of shattered ice on the water surface.
It perfectly encapsulates the sensitivity of closed systems. The root cause of the biological disaster isn't biological at all. It is physical and behavioral.
Man. So we have a fully diagnosed ecosystem. We know the still water is providing the tension canvas. We know the protein and the rotting plants are acting as the oily paint. And we know the slippery container and human muscle memory are the trigger.
The mystery is solved.
The mystery is solved. But diagnosing the disease doesn't cure the patient. How do you clean up a microscopic oil spill without dismantling the entire aquarium and starting over?
This is where Aang's notes offer just a masterclass in elegant, targeted problem solving. The solution is remarkably low-tech.
Low-tech is an understatement. The solutions detailed in the journal are shockingly mundane.
They are.
Aang writes that to remove the biofilm, you can simply take a completely dry paper towel and lightly lay it on the surface of the water to soak the oily scum right off.
Just a paper towel.
Or, alternatively, you can use a fine mesh fishnet to just scoop the crinkled film away, and then you combine this physical removal with a behavioral shift, paying much closer attention to the feeding portions to compensate for those slippery pellets.
It is a brilliant two-pronged approach that separates the immediate symptom from the systemic root cause.
I really have to push back on the paper towel part, though.
Really?
Yeah. If I woke up and saw my aquarium looking like a toxic waste dump covered in a sheet of oily, fractured ice, I would panic. I would assume the entire water supply was poisoned. I'd be at the pet store buying chemical water clarifiers, biological sludge destroyers, enzymes like 20 different bottles of liquid solutions to fix the chemistry. Wait, just a dry paper towel? For an issue that looks like fractured ice, I would have expected some intense chemical water treatment. How is laying a piece of household paper towel on the water a better cure than advanced water treatments?
Your reaction is completely understandable. When we are confronted with a visually severe problem, our instinct is to deploy an equally complex, heavy-handed solution.
Right. Big problem, big fix.
We assume catastrophic visuals require chemical interventions. But pouring clarifiers into the tank would actually be a massive error. It completely ignores the physics we just discussed.
Because the problem isn't in the water column itself.
Exactly. The oil and the proteins are lighter than water. They are entirely trapped in that ultra-thin microscopic layer right at the boundary of the air. They haven't contaminated the 10 gallons of water below. They're biologically quarantined at the absolute top. If you pour a chemical clarifier into the tank, you are introducing foreign, potentially disruptive substances into the entire healthy water column to solve a problem that only exists in the top fraction of a millimeter.
You'd be medicating the whole body for a surface scratch.
That's a great way to frame it. By using a dry paper towel, Eng is leveraging basic physics, specifically capillary action and hydrophobic interactions.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. A paper towel is made of densely packed cellulose fibers. Water is a polar molecule, meaning it has a positive and negative charge, which is why it sticks to itself to form that surface tension.
Right.
Oil, on the other hand, is nonpolar or hydrophobic. It actively repels water.
So how does the paper towel tell the difference between the two?
When you briefly lay the dry cellulose fibers on the surface, those fibers act as a mechanical sponge. The hydrophobic oil slicks, which are already trying to avoid the water beneath them, adhere rapidly to the dry fibers of the towel.
Because they want to get out of the water.
Yes. And because you are only leaving it there for a second, the capillary action pulls the concentrated oil slick up into the paper, lifting it entirely off the surface tension without breaking that tension and mixing the oil back down into the clean water.
That is incredible. It physically extracts the symptom without touching the underlying ecosystem.
It is instant mechanical removal. A fine mesh net achieves a very similar mechanical extraction by physically scooping the bound lipids off the surface floor. But the elegance of Eng's approach is that the physical extraction is only step one.
Right, because if you just use the paper towel, the biofilm will just come right back the next day. The localized plant decay and the slippery pellets are still generating oil.
Precisely. The paper towel treats the acute symptom gently, but the portion control fixes the systemic flaw permanently.
Ah.
By consciously overriding that muscle memory, Eng forces the behavioral change. Paying close attention to the angle of the container stops the tumbling pellets.
Which stops the overfeeding.
Halting the overfeeding cuts off the excess protein, and cutting off the protein starves the biofilm of its raw materials.
It is an incredibly satisfying resolution. You physically remove the present danger using nothing more than capillary action, and you pair it with a conscious behavioral shift to protect the future of the tank.
It really demonstrates the value of pausing to observe rather than reacting with panic. By understanding the physical mechanics of the environment, the biological inputs of the inhabitants, and the psychological habits of the caretaker, a complex ecological disaster is resolved with a paper towel and a moment of mindfulness.
The journey we just took through Eng's aquarium notes really is a masterclass in systemic problem solving. We started with a terrifying visual, a crinkly, icy-looking scum suffocating a glass box.
Very dramatic.
But by refusing to panic, we traced the cascade of hidden causes. We discovered that perfectly still water wasn't just peaceful, it was acting as a rigid structural canvas.
Right.
We learned that the very plants meant to clean the tank were actually creating a localized biological overload, dumping cellular oils into the water.
And we also confronted the reality of user interface. We saw how a seemingly irrelevant physical parameter, just the millimeter size of a manufactured fish food pellet, can completely short-circuit human muscle memory and introduce a massive chemical imbalance into a closed loop.
All leading to a solution that ignored expensive chemical treatments in favor of a household paper towel. I think the overarching takeaway for you today is just a reminder of how sensitive closed systems truly are.
Absolutely.
Whether we are talking about a 10-gallon glass box of water on a desk, the workflow dynamics of a massive corporate office, or, your own daily routine, they are all highly sensitive to microscopic changes in input.
A disruption in one isolated corner of a system will inevitably compound, mutate, and surface somewhere entirely unexpected. The key is learning to treat the whole ecosystem, not just blindly attacking the symptom.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. If a simple, unnoticed change in the physical size of a single fish food pellet can bypass human muscle memory and cascade into a visible, oily catastrophe that threatens the delicate balance of an entire aquarium.
Hmm.
What tiny, easily overlooked variables, what minor frictions in your tools or your environment might be fundamentally altering the ecosystems of your own daily habits and workspaces right now? Take a close look at the surface of your own routines. You might just find a slippery container of your own.